Hey there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back. It's the Red Pill Religion podcast. Red Pill Religion, where amongst the things we say are that belief in the supernatural and transcendent is normal, healthy, rational, and evidence-based. So if you like the kind of work we're doing on here, please support our work on Red Pill Religion, redpillreligion.com, where in these days of social media censorship, we're pretty sure that platform will always be there. We'd love your support on the PayPal, Patreon, Subscribe Star, and Bitcoin tip jars as always appreciated and always helped. Appreciated and always helps. Please go ahead and find us on minds.com at Red Pill Religion, Facebook at Red Pill Religion, gab.com at Red Pill Religion. We're thinking about MeWe. We aren't sure yet, but we're on all those social media. And if you're a nerd who likes chatting and games and arguing about politics and science and stuff, feel free to check out our free Discord chat room where we're in there every day having a good time. Joining us tonight, as per usual weekly, although the schedule may change, we're still kind of a little bit in flux, but joining us in our usual Wednesday spot for now is science fiction writer, lawyer, newspaper man, and general nerd John C. Wright. Say hi to everybody, Mr. Wright. Or don't. Mr. Wright?
Hello? I can't hear you.
There you go. Can you hear me now? Are you good now? Can you hear me, sir? Well, while he's figuring out whatever's going on there, because I don't know what it is, you cannot hear me. Well, I hear you. So, and my microphone is bouncing. So I hear you, and my mic is bouncing.
I can hear you. I
hear you, and
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can totally hear you, and I've heard you this entire time. And my mic has been bouncing up and down, so I'm going to hope at least that we have sound.
Nope.
I do hear us. I do hear us on the stream. So I'm not sure what happened there. I hope it doesn't happen again. Say hi to everybody, John.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Everybody, please be sure to visit sci-fi-wright.com and also Lamplighter.com. Links in the low bar or on the blog. I see on John's blog. First off, when you go to John's blog, you'll see some neat stuff on there. Be sure to click on the Works button to buy his awesome fiction. Many of it award-winning, award-nominated, and lots of good science fiction and fantasy. Buy every book on there to be a loyal Red Pill Religion fan. Well, I will give you a free interview if you buy every John C. Wright book. Right now, I guarantee you a free interview if you just go buy every one of those books. There's other ways to get one of those too. In any case, what is going on right now on sci-fi-wright.com? Oh, the I don't want to talk about New York. I just don't.
That was Virginia.
Oh no, what's going on in Virginia in Fantasy?
It was killed in committee. So Moloch's stranglehold around the neck of the Virginians has been loosened thumb by forefinger.
So the state of Virginia was nearly about to go ahead and legalize, just like New York.
Legalize infanticide.
When are they going to just be honest and put the temple to Moloch up publicly and just burn the sacrifices where we can all enjoy?
I hate to say it, but they did already put up a statue to Baphomet on one of these campuses out in public. So
that actually reminds me of the subject of neurolinguistic programming, which we're going to be talking about soon. Anyway, go ahead and check out his blog where he talks about more than that. Obviously, he was nice enough to put up a note to our show. Lost on the Last Continent has returned, a free science fiction novel that John has been offering people to give a taste of his fiction, up to episode 69, The First Mate's Mate. So be sure to check that out. And so you want to mention anything else, John, before we delve into?
Nope. I'm working on Last Continent. I'm also working on a project called Star Quest, which my fans at least have heard about. It's my I was so disappointed with the last Star Wars movie that I thought someone should write an old-fashioned pulp, two-fisted action thriller with a little bit of religion, a little bit of magic thrown in, a little bit of crime drama. And so that's underway, and I do not yet have a due date for those books because they're in production now. They're being written now. And yes, there will be space princesses.
Beautiful space princesses. That's
Beautiful
the
space
important.
princesses.
Excellent, excellent. All righty, very good.
I have made a scientific study of pulp magazines from the 30s, 40s, and early 50s, and all space princesses seem to have bare midriffs. So that's just a fact. It's a scientific fact.
Oh, I thought that went without saying, but thank you for the reassurances. I would have been upset if I had seen a clothed midriff.
Now, speaking of neurolinguistic programming, A. Van Vogt was a science fiction writer who wrote a popularized version of the philosophy back in the late 30s and early 40s, when it was at that time known by the moniker non-Aristotelian philosophy, or Null A. And believe it or not, in the second Null A book, the main character, female, the main heroine, Patricia Harding, turns out to be Risha of the Greatest Empire, a space princess. So you think I could not tie those two things together, and yet there it is. There it is.
The world of Null A. So you believe that neurolinguistic programming, it's right here. What you just said is here in Wikipedia, which, by the way, I continue to say is not a reliable source.
You might want to use Infogalactic if you don't mind going to
a better site. Yeah, I don't know. If,
one that's not edited by leftists. One that's not edited by leftists.
Well, this is just an image of the book, and it is interesting that it mentions what you're saying there.
General semantics and Korzybinski. And the S.A. Hayek is the one who coined the term neurolinguistic programming. But he himself, in his book on semantics, I forget what it's called, Sanity and Meaning, maybe. In Hayakawa's book on semantics, he mentions Korzybinski by name and gives him credit for his major ideas. So the one really does spring out of the other and is basically the same idea. Now,
so it's not. I find this very interesting. It's non-Aristotelian logic, which I assume means some kind of godless logic.
That's not the way it was presented to me. It is multi-valued rather than two-valued logic. Two-valued logic is A is not A. In multi-valued logic, between A and non-A, you have various shades of gray. So it's an attempt to formalize multiple value logic systems.
Makes sense. Okay, and you can do neurolinguistic programming with it. No. Why don't we go ahead?
Let's take this one step at a time. Let's start with Korzybinski, because that's where I was introduced to it. I never heard of Hayakawa until I was late in life, but I knew about Null A books from when I was a kid, and I was even invited. Let me mention why, because I also wrote the authorized sequel to Null A called Null A Continuum. A. Van Vogt's widow asked me to write the book, and it was I was invited to speak at the General Semantics Society when they heard that someone was writing another book about general semantics, and I was very careful in that book not to put any of my own philosophy in it, because I am an Aristotelian, backward and forward, top to bottom. But I put in Van Vogt's philosophy, which I understand completely. But even if I don't agree with it, let me see if I can give your readers the sum up of what it stands for. Which I should say, by the way, Van Vogt himself did in the chapter headings of all his chapters of the second Null A book. He wrote like a one-paragraph summary for like 20 chapters or so. The basic theory of general semantics is that in doing semantics, you study the meanings of words. So you investigate questions like, does the word unicorn refer to a real thing? If it doesn't refer to a real thing, how come we all know what the word means when we use it? What's the degree of realness, of a fiction or of a word in general? That's the kind of thing semantics studies, the nature of meaning. What are the shades of meaning in a word? General semantics was a term coined by Korzybinski, and I'm afraid I'm mispronouncing his name every single time I say it, so my apologies to your Russian listeners. When he talked about general semantics, he said there's more to a word than just the label on the can. There's more to a word than just we use this noise to represent this idea. It also has an effect on your thinking, both consciously and subconsciously. You become acclimated to it. You become habituated to certain words and to the associations those words bring. Because every word both has denotations and connotations. The denotation is the real literal meaning, and the connotation is the various metaphorical, poetical, and secondary meanings that a word carries along with it. An example of that is if I say a luscious sirloin steak smothered in savory mushrooms, and I say a dead piece of burnt cow meat covered with fungus, the denotation of both those phrases is the same, but the connotation is very different. The first is what Madison Avenue would tell you if it wanted you to buy the steak, and the second is what a political speaker would tell you if he wanted you not to buy the steak. You see where I'm going with this?
I think so, yeah.
So Korzybinski's theory was that we become habituated to certain connotations of words without being aware of it. So that after a while, it's almost like a Pavlovian reflex. It's almost like a magic spell. That you're hypnotized. When someone points at a MAGA hat and says racist, the people who react as if a red hat was the same as a white hood have been conditioned, habituated into reacting toward the one as if it were the other. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now, so Korzybinski's theory was that in order to not be victimized by deliberate manipulations of word denotations and connotations, not to be hypnotized by word use, it was important to use your words precisely and self-consciously, to be aware of when you were making automatic assumptions in the back of your mind. So he insisted that you discipline yourself to speak basically like a lawyer with qualifications at every turn, with every noun and verb, to keep in mind that the members of a class do not all share all their properties in common, only their essential properties. So that if you say a chair, it doesn't mean it's the same as every other chair that ever existed. If you say a Jew, it doesn't mean he's the same as every other Jew that ever existed. Now, the first one seems like a fairly harmless mistake if you think one chair is exactly like every other chair in the world. But Korzybinski was writing in the 30s when the Jews were being driven out of Germany in preparation to a mass slaughter of them. And that event, he said, was because of the power of words to hypnotize people. He said that if you have to distinguish the general from the particular case. He said you have to date your words because the George today and George 10 years ago is not the same George. So if you say George is impatient because that's the impression you got 10 years ago, what you should really say is 10 years ago George was impatient. And you also have to categorize and index your words so that you know that they're referring to things. If you say Sally is scatterbrained, you also have to keep in mind that Sally has other qualities, not just those. She could, for example, be a very loving person and be very skilled at chess or mathematics or something else you wouldn't expect a scatterbrain to be good at, if you see what I'm saying.
Sure, okay.
Let me not pick on Sally. Let me use myself as an example. If someone said John Wright's a genius, and the reason why they said that is because either A, I paid them, or B, they thought my writing, my creative writing was very well written, they would be falling to an easy error because the gift of the gab, the ability to put words together cleverly, the ability to do public speaking, the ability to think about philosophical topics is not the same as smarts. I'm not a very smart guy when it comes to anything practical. I'm like the stereotyped absent-minded professor. See, so anytime you make any judgment like that, even something like this is hot and that's cold, you have to keep in mind that not all parts of it are going to be uniform. It's not going to be always the same way. Now, his theory was that by being precise enough in your thinking, you could eliminate what he called false effects associations. I mentioned this in our other broadcast, but I'd like to repeat it if you're willing to indulge me. What Korzybinski and later on A.E. Van Dogen in his story.
What's this guy's name that you're saying again? Who's this Russian you keep mentioning again?
If you go back to the Van Vo page in Wikipedia, you should be able to see it. It's Alfred Korzybski. Alfred Saarbeck Korzybski.
General.
I said it was a Russian name. It's a Polish name. My mistake.
Korzybski.
He wrote a book called Science and Sanity. An Introduction to Non-Aristotelian Systems and to General Semantics. That was his magnum opus, his book that puts forward his philosophy. There, you got him. That's him.
Oh, there he is. Okay, so let's do.
By the way,
this is all very airy theory, huh?
His book is almost unreadable.
Why am I not surprised?
Read the science fiction version instead. Well, let me just say one last thing, and then I'll turn the mic back over to you. What he was basically afraid of was what he called false to fact associations, where merely by combining, by habituating, by repeating two things that are unrelated as if they were related. I'll use the example of a white hood and a red hat before. You make it so that in the minds of the listeners, when they become habituated or conditioned to react to the one thing as if it is the other thing, they have become neurotic and perhaps even psychotic. He thought you could become neurotic by misusing language. He thought you could go insane because, of course, he's a Pole and he lived through the Nazi invasion of Poland.
So well, he in fact saw insanity.
He saw them go insane. He saw them merely by using words related to racial groups, words related to economic ideas, words of hate, words where, and here's how it works. Let's say you take two ideas that are unrelated. You take the idea of prenatal infanticide. You're going to kill a baby in the womb, but you call it by some other word like abortion, so it doesn't sound so bad. And then you repeat over and over again that this is the same as a woman's freedom, as her liberty, as her right to choose, as her natural inborn rights. Now, this propaganda technique would not work on a people who did not hold natural rights to be sacred. But among Americans who in our founding documents say all men are created equal and have natural rights, the idea that this thing is a natural right then becomes something it's easy for them to habituate to. Because once the two things are connected, once the two opposites are connected by a false to facts association, you associate the one thing with the other thing over and over again by repetition, by propaganda. Anyone who says your victim can only fall into one of two errors if he does not make the distinction, if he doesn't notice the association. If he accepts the association, he's going to accept it on a pre-verbal level. He's going to accept it automatically and unthinkingly because it's what everyone around him is saying. It's what he's hearing on the radio. It's what Chancellor Hitler has said, and who can doubt him? So someone says A is equal to B, A is equal to not A. Once you say, and I'm using a highly emotional example because this is a highly emotional methodology. When people get highly emotional, they tend not to be precise or distinct. And in fact, the attempt to be distinct, they regard as pettifoggery, as arguing about angels dancing on pinheads. So they regard as logic chopping, hair splitting. Okay, but it's not. It's sanity. It's the way to save yourself. So once the victim falls for the trick, he either goes, well, wait a minute, killing babies is evil, therefore I am against liberty. I would much rather live in a country that was run by a tyranny rather than have babies being killed. Or he says, as the Americans tend to do, well, wait a minute, I'm so much in love with liberty that this liberty, the liberty of baby killing, I accept completely, and I will merely refer to it by a euphemism both in my thought and in my words. I will never even actually ever refer to the concept I'm talking about. See? Well, so you got them both ways. And you end up with those two groups, the tyrants and the baby killers, hating each other bitterly because each one sees the flaw of the other. But if they don't make the distinction, if they don't make sure their words reflect reality, then reality is lost to them. And the conflict that's separating them is artificial. It's something made by a false to facts association. What you try to do is get your words to have a facts to facts association. So the picture in your head and the reality outside that you're making a picture of are the same.
A lot of people...
His slogan was, the map is not the territory, the word is not the thing it represents. That's the crucial thing you have to keep in mind if you're willing to look at the words you're using and thinking about so they don't lead you astray, as in the example of the Nazis, the KKK, the abortionists, and other people who use language to disguise their meaning.
So this is all a lot to absorb for the audience, and so I was wondering if we could give a more, if you have any more direct everyday life examples.
Yes, here's one. Krzyzewski was giving a lecture about this very topic, and he smacked his lips and said he was a little hungry, and he drew out a cookie, a little biscuit, and started chewing it. And he asked if anyone in the audience wanted one too, and one or two of the students said sure. So he tossed the cookies to them, the biscuits to them, and they started chewing on them. And after they chewed for a while, he drew out the package he was drawing it from, and on the package he had written the words "dog biscuit," "dog treat." They were so physically sickened that some of them had to run from the room to spit out or vomit up the cookie they had eaten. And it was, of course, just an actual real cookie. So when
it was not a dog cookie.
That he had tricked them, he said, you see, you think you taste things with your mouth, but you actually taste them with your words. The word was more real to them than the physical sensations of what they were putting in their mouth.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I get it. Well,
see, because the words affected their brains, affected their endocrine system.
But this is garbage, and then immediately spit it out and got sick.
It affected their whole biology. See, mind over matter.
Huh.
The reason why this whole topic came up last week is because you have heard about someone using this exact same science, neurolinguistic programming, to do the opposite of what Krzyzewski was trying to do. To use it like a Madison Avenue shyster, a trickster, to make it so that people have wrong reactions to reality. So they think cookies are dog food, and they spit it out.
Huh.
And that is like a wizard hypnotizing someone, and it's very successful. And people have made a scientific study of the exact words and phrases needed to get people to react incorrectly, false to facts, to reality. Please notice how much of our modern dialogue is just made of euphemisms or the opposite.
It's gotten completely out of control. I see it everywhere now. Euphemisms and words that don't mean anything, and people on the right and the left both engaging in what some call a Hegelian dialectic that's just like you're both wrong, and it's watching you go back and forth is fascinating because it's like people have been trapped into this dialectic, this narrative, this narrative / counter narrative, and I see it so much. It's like, how does anybody think straight?
By studying Thomas Aquinas. Did you remember my parable of the false to facts association between tyranny and abortion? So that the one side thinks they're defending liberty, and the other side thinks they're defending children, but they both see the other side as devils because the left thinks the right are tyrants. The right thinks the left are baby killers. Right? Because the idea has been associated in their mind by a false to facts association. It's a spell.
Yeah. In the comments, Dirac says that red hats don't trigger anger. Yeah, they do, dude. At least here in the United States. Heck, there's been whole articles written about how we should just understand that people will automatically see you as a racist if you're wearing one of those.
You have to explain that it's here in America that it's a red baseball cap with a slogan written on it that says "Make America Great Again." It was
right. And I mean, we've seen
by Trump during the 2016 election.
Well, we've seen whole articles about why people should just understand that you're seen as a racist if you wear one of those hats.
Just to be clear, we're not talking about Cardinals hats. I see. I'm being Krzyzewski now. I want to make sure that we're precise.
Okay. Yes, red MAGA hats is what we did mean.
Red MAGA hats, and the white hoods we mean are not the white hoods of Dominicans or Franciscan priests. We refer to the white hoods of the KKK, a Democrat terrorist group that arose after the Civil War to try to kill Catholics and blacks and to terrorize them into subservience.
Now we've got someone in the comments. I don't know if I want to entertain this. And neurolinguistic programming works is tantamount to claiming homeopathy works. Please justify that statement on any level besides you just being a little snot. What evidence do you have that neurolinguistic programming does not work? And why does all the research we have on it exist? And why do you get to dismiss it all? What were you going to say, John?
Well, I was going to say I myself was not making the claim either that it worked or that it didn't work. I like I said, I'm familiar with the body of work that's prior to that. I don't know what Hayakawa is. Am I pronouncing his name correctly? I don't know what Hayakawa actually did or what he was trying to do with it. I have heard, however, that people with shell-shocked soldiers, which we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, have often been helped by this kind of attention. I myself don't know how much is the attention as opposed to the type of attention paid. I'm a big believer that homeopathy will tend to work on anyone with enough faith, because I believe in faith.
I would
believe in the placebo effect. I've seen people get better just because they thought they're getting better when they were given, sugar.
I would be willing to bet, since we have seen so, I mean, laughing at neurolinguistic programming is something, I believe there's been neurolinguistic programming on the entire U.S. population for a long time now. I really do. I don't care who thinks I'm crazy about that.
If by that you mean a deliberate attempt to associate certain words with certain concepts, I would say all political correctness is an attempt to use neurolinguistic programming for a sinister effort. In the same way that Korzybski wanted to use it to make men sane, all you have to do is do the opposite to make men insane. I mean, any tool can be used. I mean, to pry up or hammer down a nail. Every poison it could also be a medicine. Every medicine can also be a poison. It depends on the dose. It depends on the pharmacist.
Well, I'll give you an example of one that I think is true. Although this may trigger somebody, I don't know. I mean, I've seen this in quite a few different sources.
The word trigger is itself a neurolinguistic programming trigger.
So is the word, I would argue, the word conspiracy theory, which was in fact invented by the CIA in order
investigations into conspiracies that they were actively engaged in.
Yes, the very term conspiracy theorist. And look what, maybe you can help me untangle it this way, which is not to say that every conspiracy is true. In fact, I'm sure most conspiracy theories are false, but people do conspire, and there's nothing wrong with theorizing about that. There's so many conspiracies that have turned out to have been true. You can't, why would you even put the two together like that to make a negative?
Here's the thing I noticed. I noticed that there is actually a effect that happens to people when they believe in some occult or hidden reality, like a conspiracy, where any evidence that's brought up to their attention is dismissed because they think that they know the occult truth. That's what the word is usually used to mean. But I've also noticed something else, that people who use the term conspiracy theory almost never point at communism, which actually is a conspiracy that took over 3/4 of the world in this single generation. It's the most successful conspiracy of all time. And it took over the academia here in America in less than a generation. It's taken over the schools. It's taken over the mass media, the fake news, and so on and so forth. So what dismays me is when conspiracy theorists don't believe in real conspiracies, when they believe in UFOs or chemtrails or the Illuminati, and they believe the Jews are behind everything, but they don't believe that the commies are behind everything.
Hey, we got via super chat. We got Eldridge Fan come in. Thank you, Eldridge Fan. The comment is okay. 2.00. But in any case, TH Plonk says there's very little to laugh about whenever people systematically set out to use language for other things than communication. Yeah, and that's a good answer to somebody who's skeptical of the claim, skeptical that this exists. Come on, it's preposterous. You watch advertising all the time. You can hear commercial jingles. That is a form of programming. In fact, they call it programming.
Yeah, it's
visibly everywhere in the culture, huh?
Advertising is a deliberate and relatively benign attempt to manipulate a person's on a prelingual, non-rational level. They found out long ago that they make more sales by showing a pretty girl holding up a Coke can than by describing the actual benefits and the cost-benefit analysis of using their product.
Right, or even just saying how yummy the Coke is. No, I'll put it next to a pretty girl; it'll be yummier.
Yeah, or Coke is not a good example but let's use a Volkswagen Beetle. When I was young, they had an ad that was just a listing of the gas mileage, the ease of engine maintenance, and the other actual real benefits of a Volkswagen Beetle. And they lost money that year, and it was the biggest bomb in an advertising campaign they ever had. Most people who sell cars just drape a pretty girl in a bikini over the hood, which is actually not a very comfortable place for the young lady to stand. To lay down, but it sells cars because the association then is made, the false effects association between masculinity and powerful vehicles is then habituated in the person's thinking. Now, I should say these false associations are not usually always false. There is an advantage to a young man who's looking for a date to have a nice car, because some women are attracted to that, and attracted for maybe a shallow reason, but a logical reason, which is the guy's probably wealthy and therefore is a good provider. Will be a good provider. So, and this is kind of all takes place in the shadowy regions of the brain where you don't actually stop and analyze what your real motives are. But it's the deliberate manipulation of those things that makes it sinister. Because obviously, not everyone who has a nice car is a nice guy. Not everyone who drives a car is gonna get a date. Not every girl. And some people just want to use the vehicle to go from point A to point B. I mean, it's just it's nonsense. Now, but the worst nonsense is political correctness. The actual deliberate deconstruction of speech into sheer nonsense operates on two levels. They take some hideous enormity and use a benign sounding, neutral sounding, or scientific sounding word, usually Latinate, to refer to it, or they take something perfectly normal and use some term to excoriate it. We don't have a word in English for the opposite of a euphemism. You could coin a word like cacophonism, but a swear word. They use a swear word rather than a real word to refer to something. So instead of
anti-choicers,
instead of saying sodomite, which has a negative implication, people say gay, which is a word that means bright and happy. Okay, so that's a euphemism. Instead of saying chaste or decent, they say homophobic or transphobic, as if to have normal, decent ideas about sexuality was a psychopathology. They don't argue the point that being decent and being chaste is a psychopathology. They just assert that it is.
Well, and they call you sexually repressed. And sexual repression, which is caused by not masturbating to enough porn or not having sex with enough people, supposedly is a psychological malady. The problem is there's no scientific evidence for sexual repression.
But they don't. But by manipulating words to have a negative implication, if they just use the word repression, that sounds scientific, but it's not. It sounds enlightened, but it's not. And it sounds like it's a bad, unhealthy thing, but it's not. We call that virtue. We call that self-discipline.
Interesting.
Like the dead cow covered with fungus and the savory steak smothered in mushrooms, those two sets of words refer to the same reality. See?
Yeah, they do. I even cringe at sodomite.
Both on left and right, but I tell you, the left has made a determinate practice of this, and it's the core of their philosophy is to use the wrong words for things. It's not the right wing does it very little or not at all. Very little.
In Sam Mike says neurolinguistic programming was easier to pull off in the 1940s to 1960s because media was limited to a few sources. It's much harder to do that now with the internet in full strength. Watch your assumptions there, Same. It's very easy to fool yourself into thinking you are unaffected, or that they're not still doing it. I would argue that they have more sophisticated ways of doing it, including their control of the mainstream news, which is, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a fact. All of our mainstream news is controlled by 6 major corporations, all of which are completely incestuous with each other. That's inherently, and you can see a driven narrative on the front page and neurolinguistic programming usage every day, not just in the advertising.
Let me prove your point. I am the only person I know who did not change his language when everyone around me changed in the 1980s. So I still say sodomite and pervert and decent and indecent and chaste and unchaste, and no one else I know uses those terms. I still say Negro, and everyone tells me, oh no, you can't say that. You have to say people of color now. And I say, if you say people of color or you say colored person, those two words refer to the same reality. So the only difference between them is a false to fact association. One has built up in your mind.
Colored people versus people of color is like, one is supposed to be bad and the other is supposed to be good, but in reality, they both refer to the same reality.
Refer to the same reality, and so they
argue about the use of the word color, but
the different emotional reaction is based on a habituated response. You can argue about color if you like, but the word still, I mean, that goes back.
And in fact, I can tell you how that's a good example from the 80s. We were taught in the 80s that calling people colored people was racist,
demeaning,
and but the people of color was okay. And what's disturbing and infuriating about that is that the term colored people was come up with by black people who, in their advocacy groups, said they preferred colored people to Negro.
What does NAACP stand for?
Huh?
What does
National Organization for the Advancement of Colored People? Yeah, it's over 100 years almost.
It was originally a euphemism. So.
Right. Now there's arguments as to whether the NAACP was all that, but whatever. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole.
We're talking about
it's funny how the words just change. I mean, literally, it went from you say colored people to be polite to all of a sudden in the next generation, Mom, Dad, that's racist. And like they're shaming their parents as if they're racist, and their parents had been being nice by saying colored people because they didn't want to say Negro or the even worse word.
Thanks to A. Van Vogt's Null books, from a young age, I was armed and armored against this nonsense because I knew, ready for this, hold your breath, you cannot change reality by changing the words you use to describe reality. Only a magician can call a pebble a feather and turn it into a feather by using the true language of creation. That's according to Ursula K. Le Guin's Orochian Magicians. It's a magic spell. If the people around me insist on using a certain terminology for precision, I don't mind. And so, but the reason why the political correctness tries to use scientific sounding terms that are actually less precise, than the terminology. Let's talk about just he and she. Do you know what the word he means?
Well, no. Tell me what it means.
Pronoun. It's a pronoun. It refers to any human being.
Right.
And in some circumstances, it refers to the male human being. It's like the word fox refers to both foxes and vixens. Dog refers to both dogs and bitches. So and same for man. Man refers both to men and women. Now, at some time in the 80s, a small group of vocal people said, you may not use the English language correctly any longer. You must now use the word he only to refer to males, because using that pronoun to refer to females or to a group whose sex is undetermined, we hereby declare it as an insult by taking offense at it. Now, I, being well aware that they're just having false associations in their mind, they're just habituating themselves to get angry the same way Pavlov's dogs salivated when the bell rang. There's no logical connection between the food Pavlov's dog is about to get in the bell that he rang. That's just something that Pavlov habituated into them. So if those people want to get angry at me for using the English language, that's on them. That's not on me. I have not become impolite because they decided to change the meaning of words in their own fevered imaginations. They've just gone mad. Okay? But the thing that shocks me is that the wide majority of the middle ground, most people are not fanatical about politics one way or the other, just went along with this nonsense and just decided, oh yeah, everyone who in the past who used the word he to refer to all mankind, mankind is another word that's on the blacklist. Everyone who's used the words he correctly from now to when the English language, was Chaucer was speaking it, they are now suddenly a misogynist. They're now suddenly
they're suddenly all seen as writing from a strictly male perspective when the use of the term he used to be much more wait for it, gender inclusive. He used to be
the word gender is a completely artificial.
It has been completely distorted.
False effect word, because they're trying to put across the implication that sex doesn't exist.
You can't say the term gender is what it is a twisting and perversion of a perfectly useful word. Within the study of linguistics, there is something called gender.
Yeah, certainly.
And it is actually true. And Marxist ideologues leaped on the fact that this is true. Within linguistics, you'll find that English has only 3 genders. Masculine, feminine, and neuter.
We don't have a declined language. We don't have any genders in our language. You need a language.
According to my understanding of linguistics, it is considered that English has three: masculine, feminine, and neuter, which is what it
How could
is
we?
when you say it.
But that's not the gender of the word. The gender of the word is whether the word is masculine or feminine.
And they will say that, and they will say that the gender in various languages.
No, you don't know what you're talking about.
Can I at least finish my
French, la and lay refer to the gender of the word. Like la moustache mustaches are female. The closest thing we have to it in English is storms are female, ships are female, and nations are female. When you say England has gone to war, she is ready for battle. That's correct in English, but in there we're ascribing a sex to an inanimate object.
All right, within my understanding of what I've read about linguistics, which you can believe me or not, maybe it's different. The English does in fact have three, as I just stated, whereas in some other languages, you will also have additional genders. However,
gender and people do not.
Okay, and let me finish. Which is that in those other languages, while other genders are allowed, they refer to real things anyway. So that the gender might refer to whether an object is animate or inanimate or alive or dead. And within contemporary linguistics, that's considered gender state, but because it has nothing to do with the political context at all.
Alive and dead is not a gender state in declined languages.
Okay. I'll send you an article or two on how to it. Maybe the modern linguistics has gone in new directions you don't know about. I've read,
or maybe they've gone mad and they're mistaken. That's the possibility too.
Yeah.
In any case, in anthropology, as an analogy to language, in the 70s, some anthropologists started speaking of the roles that the sexes played in society, which were not necessarily biologically determined, and referred to that as gender. But he was using the word as an analogy, if you see what I'm saying. Because we didn't have a word for it in English. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
And so from that, the cultural Marxists decided to use the word to refer to all sexuality. Now, one advantage of the word is that our word sex in English refers to the sex act, to the division of the sexes, to which sex you are, and so on and so forth. So there is some room for ambiguity. Also, the word he is ambiguous because it can either mean all humans or just male humans. The same with the word fox is ambiguous. Now, I myself don't regard those ambiguities as requiring any linguistic change because especially when you substitute a word that is less clear, that is more ambiguous in its stead, the way the political correctness people have for so many things. Now, that being said, I also think there's nothing wrong with euphemisms in language. There's sometimes when you want to express things delicately, and you don't want to offend the ladies and the children in the room. So that's not what my objection is. My objection is to the deliberate manipulation of psychology by means of a scientific and determined study of what the emotional and physical reactions. Remember the guy barfing at the dog cookie, the imaginary dog cookie, based on this study of neurolinguistic programming.
Okay, just because I'm an ornery nerd, I cite the Oxford Research Encyclopedia's entry on gender.
Sure.
And as a linguistic concept, and as I was noting, they give particular examples how in other languages gender might refer to whether something is animate or inanimate, whether it is alive or dead, a person or an animal or an object. So whereas we might have a word like he for a person, they might have a variant of he indicating that it's an animal, a variant of he indicating that it's inanimate like a rock, a variant of he to indicate that it's a female person. This feature does exist of multiple genders, but they all still wind up referring to real things. They still support your point, huh?
When I studied Greek and Latin, that word characteristic was not called gender. Gender was referring to whether the word was male or female.
Okay.
So well, I think that's something that's recent. When was that thing written?
Yeah,
remember, according to Krasinski, you have to also date all your comments and also define your words more clearly.
Yeah,
Basically,
you
we're
do.
having a dispute about how a word is used, but we're
I
not
know,
having a dispute
but
about what it is.
this is a feature of the. I mean, we've accepted the fact that language evolves over time, but I would assert to you that our media masters have been accelerating that natural trend. They
No,
change
no,
what
no.
words mean.
Be careful. Language does evolve over time, but it also devolves when it's deliberately maligned.
Yes.
A deliberate action by a group of Madison Avenue psychological manipulators, or worse, Kremlin manipulators, who are writing propaganda, who are telling the big lie in order to deceive the people through the engine of the press. That's not a natural evolution of language. The use of the word mouse to refer to a pointing device because it kind of looks like a mouse with a tail, that is a fine
Check this.
organic growth of language. It's something we did not have a word for, and we picked a word that was the closest analogy because of the way the thing looked. Okay, but to use
Uh-huh.
the word Islamophobic to refer to anyone who is fearful that certain of the partisans of a particular religion in recent times have been responsible for multitudes of acts of terrorist violence against apparently randomly selected targets. That's not a natural evolution, you know. I would
Yeah.
say,
So, I mean,
like,
let's.
even a phrase like Native American, which is a word I don't use, it's forbidden in my house, to distinguish between the red Indians who were in America before the white man came and the Indians from India, who since there's now much more of them living in America than in the 1950s, we might want to have to, undo the confusion originally created by Columbus as to what to call the Aboriginal peoples of the autochthons of the New World.
I always
Well,
liked Amerindian myself, but in any case,
Amerindian's fine. That strikes me as being a natural evolution. But to call them native as if we're not native, that seems to be meaninglessly confusing. The word native means born here. I was born here. I'm a native.
uh, let me just point something out to this too that's ironic too, because let's say they take a word like gender, and let's just go ahead and concede that some linguists have been using it this way as a long time. If you and I'm going to assume it's a more modern refinement of linguistics, but they fancy that they're a science. I'm not sure they are, but they call themselves one. Even when you look into the linguistic concepts, you'll find that the linguists have identified what they consider to be 15 genders, but they're approaching this in a very clinical way. And what you'll notice is that in naturally occurring genders, quote unquote, in language, they're all listing these gender states in other languages as things which are undoubtedly real, whether
Like
something is alive or dead.
right.
Yeah, animate or inanimate. I think in some cases old or new. Um, uh, uh, and they get pretty abstract in some of them, but it's because they're using one word to describe, like the word it 15 different ways to be more precise in those languages. They're all still natural things where people are describing real things that everybody knows are real, and not constructs like if you notice, for example, we've taken the word gender and first it meant our sexual physiognomy, and then it meant our sexual orientation. Then there's 56 different genders,
The next step
which are
was,
described by 56
may I?
different.
May I? The next step,
Yeah.
beyond orientation was sexual self-identity, and this is where the neurolinguistic programming comes in. You were then programmed to associate that with the theory that a man selects his own identity by an act of will in his own brain.
And by selfish gene theory, which is bollocks, but that you have a gene that makes you weird this way.
Right.
But it's not weird because even though it's a genetic characteristic that's unusual, we're all unusual, so everything's normal. You see how that all works? No, probably not. I'm sure John followed the logic train. I don't know if everybody else did.
Let's sum up. The word was originally used to refer to sex because people were too delicate to use the word sex. Then it was used to refer to your sexual role in society. Then it was used to refer to your physiognomy, whether you had breasts or a penis. Then it was used to refer to your sexual orientation, that is to say, your sexual appetites, to which sex were you attracted. Then it was used to refer to your sexual self-identity. And then it was programmed so as to make it sound as if only the person himself knew what his sexual identity was.
And so,
If a man was a woman, you were not allowed to question that. In
and
fact,
so what? And also, whatever
so using the word gender then means that, and so the genders now became male, female, neutral, bisexual, ambisexual, multisexual, dinosexual, robosexual, pansexual, heterosexual, homo, dysphoresexual, non-sexual, asexual, bicurious, bicyclist. It's pure nonsense. It's pure blithering nonsense, and people are taking this with extreme seriousness because they can't divorce the word from the reality. They're under a spell. The word has hypnotized them. Have you ever wondered why discussions and debates between people who are inside and outside of a particular word trap, a particular thought prison, are almost impossible to conduct? None of their words refer to the same objects. None of them have the same emotional reactions to the same things, and they can't find any common ground. I can't point at a red hat and say, "Do you agree that hat is red?" They'll go, "No, it's a white hood." You know, I can't say what what about it? What are you afraid of? And they say, "Fear is real. Logic is not real." You see, there's no common ground. That's because of neurolinguistic programming. In this case, being abused to make them neurotic. If you rang a bell every time you slapped someone in the face or shot them in the foot, then after a while, ringing a bell, they would be shell shocked. They would rightfully flinch because they would expect they're about to be hit again. That would be an understandable reaction, but it's still an artificial reaction. It's still something that's programmed into them. You could make them afraid of a bell, see, by sheer repetition, and people can do it to themselves. People can come up with a false word picture in their head, a false model, and just associate it over and over again with incorrect concepts. And then if they lose the ability to examine the model, then they're hypnotized. Then they're in a thought prison.
And it's funny when you've. I honestly believe that they've even done that with words like skeptic.
Yeah.
Because they have turned. I mean, I say this all the time because I see it especially in young people. They really have been taught that being a skeptic means you are smart and that you understand science. And that's such a mind bomb for them because it makes them think they're intelligent to be skeptical. And it like
Right.
their brain's short when you point out that you can be skeptical of anything or anyone for any reason at any time. There is no ultimate there to skepticism. There's something called a healthy skepticism, which is having, well, I think what we would call a reasoned skepticism, a rational skepticism, an informed skepticism. Huh? Oh no, we've got stuff to do. Did I lose track of time? John,
if I may.
Yes.
Let me just add one thing so that we can tie the threads of the conversation together. The word skeptic and the self-image idea of one as being of superior intelligence, able to penetrate through the illusions that deceive your brothers, that's a false effects association.
Yep.
A man can be dumb and be skeptical. And if you're skeptical about something that's obvious, if you're skeptical about the reality of the moon landing, then you're a crackpot. See, skepticism has an appropriate reality, an appropriate place to go, and a time when there's a time for everything under heaven. There's a time to be skeptical, and there's a time to be gullible. There's a time to believe, and there's a time not to believe. So all this linguistic program that's being abused is trying to get us away from a certain concept that no one talks about these days, except for C.S. Lewis in his Abolition of Man. There are certain right emotional reactions, correct facts to facts association, correct emotional connotations to words, correct emotional connotations to things in reality, and incorrect ones, apt and inapt. It's correct to laugh at to celebrate weddings and to cry at funerals. It is incorrect to bemoan to go into mourning at a wedding and to celebrate a funeral. Those are not the correct emotional reactions to those things. To hate what is hateful is correct. To hate what is lovely, to hate what your mother and father or the nation that bore you, might be justified if you've been particularly abused, but it's not healthy. It's not correct. Nowadays, we all think that the connotations are arbitrary, and because we think they're arbitrary, we allow ourselves to be manipulated by these people who just use good sounding words to make bad things look good and bad sounding words to make good things look bad.
That's an excellent final closing thought there. Thanks, John. I'm going to close this out now, which my own final thought is that no, really, I think it's been a neurolinguistic programming trick on a lot of the young people. They've really been taught and popularized the idea that being skeptical makes you wise somehow and smart somehow, and it doesn't. It makes you dismissive. You can be skeptical of the Big Bang Theory. You can be skeptical of evolution. You can be skeptical of NASA. You can be skeptical of the Bible. You can be skeptical of Jesus. You can be skeptical of me. You can be skeptical of John Wright. You can be skeptical of anything and anyone at any reason at any time. And it's a real important thing to remember that. What is the reason for your skepticism? That's the question always you ask.
The moment you become skeptical about your own ability to think, then you have shut yourself into a thought prison, because that is the thought that stops thought.
That's right. That's right. So everybody, please check us out on redpillreligion.com. Hit that subscribe star or one of those other tip jars. We'd sure appreciate it. We're going to be back here within the next half hour or so with our nightly bull session, where we'll talk about what John and I just discussed, or whatever else you guys want to come discuss with us. Here on YouTube, while we're still here, please give us a like. Please give us a subscribe. Please tell your friends or enemies. Please visit sci-fi wright.com, and God bless everybody.